Welcome to the Afghanistan Project Podcast. I'm your host, Beth Bailey, and my guest today is Jenn Noonkester, a retired Air Force senior NCO who deployed several times during her career, including to Afghanistan and Iraq. Jenn left the service in the months following the Afghan government's collapse after a 20-year career, and she's now pursuing a degree and is involved in public service to assist her community, her fellow evacuation volunteers, veterans, and anyone else who struggles with mental health. Jenn, it's really great to have you on today, and I feel like I've done a very bad job of setting up just the sheer intenseness of what I know you have to share today. So listeners, buckle in. It's a really intense story, and I'm really glad to have you here to share it, Jenn. Thanks.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it means the world to me. And so I feel like I usually start with Afghanistan, but lately I've been going back further. And I want to kind of go to something that you mentioned in our conversations before this about your pursuit of a career as a missionary before joining the military. And I want to know what made you want to do that, and then what made you change your mind and join the military?
Yeah, so I had I was graduating high school, and I was active in my community from small town, Midwest, so everybody does something with churches. And a group of our church guys decided we were going to go and check out this community in New England that was doing this really cool outreach, trying to take care of their community and trying to help people get back on their feet. And this was right around like 2000, 2001. And so I was like, yeah, sure, I've got nothing really going on. I'd love to go. So I jumped in with them, and I fell in love with the project. I'm very community-minded. I love to help people, so it was like right up my alley. And so I know I upset my dad, but he's okay. I actually had a lot of scholarships and almost a full ride to Ball State University to go for education, and I didn't feel like that was where I was supposed to go. So I kind of gave up on all of that, which is what kind of upset my dad, and went into the less known pathway towards looking to become a missionary. What I didn't want to do was find a group that was so set on their beliefs that they couldn't meet people where they are. I believe there's a lot lost in just recognizing people in general when you're so focused on your own beliefs that you can't take a second to listen to theirs. And so that's what I found with this group. I absolutely loved it. If they wanted to listen to what we were going to say, that is, we're happy to share. Otherwise, we had no problem just sitting there letting them talk and just kind of being there with them. And so I did a semester with a group called YWAM, which is Youth with a Mission. And in order to get credit for that, you have to go on a mission trip after. And again, it's not like they're sitting there, walking around, beating you over the head with the Bible. Like they're sitting there and they want to learn about the community and find ways to assist. Kind of that whole through acts of love, And so part of our trip ended up taking us to Bosnia, a very small town in the middle of nowhere. And it just so happened that I was one of the only people in the group that had ever manipulated my MySpace. And so I kind of knew about coding, but not really, but enough to kind of at least turn the font from black to yellow. And so I volunteered because they needed help with it and figured I would try to figure it out as I went. So I tried to help this small church group stand up their own website because they didn't have a website. And so I was in there and I was helping this guy kind of manipulate his text and his pictures, and we were trying to make it look okay. And he was telling me a story about the Bosnia War and how they would, when their area was getting invaded, they had the problem where some of the soldiers would actually take explosives and mines and stuff like that and attach them to toys and throw them all over the grass fields and stuff that kids would play in, so that these kids would either, number one, pick up the landmine and blow themselves up, or number two, they would move the explosive to an area to target more of their people. And I remember sitting there listening to this guy tell the story, and you could hear it in his voice just how much it impacted him. And he said, I wish if I could do it all over again, I would have never let anybody do anything like that to my country people, And so I sat there and I was like, no, man, I get it. That completely sucks, and I'm really sorry that happens. And so he's still very upset, and he goes, if you ever get a chance to defend your own country, make sure you do, because the aftermath absolutely is terrible. And so, yeah, this was right around the end of 2000, right around 2001. I come back from my mission trip, and I'm getting ready, saving up money to start the next semester, and then 9/11 happened. So I was like, ooh, well played. And so, yeah.
Oh my God.
So
I just
began
got
the journey.
chills. Jesus,
Yeah.
that's crazy. I just had the chills more than I think I've ever had the chills doing this podcast. The Bosnian War is such a tremendously devastating example of what humans can do to their fellow humans, and I did not yet know, though, about the landmine situation. I can't imagine what that would have felt like, hearing it from someone and seeing the kinds of people who would have been caught up in that too. I mean, that's a very intense experience. And so that's when you decided, I'm not going to be a missionary, I'm going to go serve my country and try to...
Yep. And the only reason I joined the Air Force instead of the Marines was because the Air Force called me first.
Isn't it funny how that happens? Like, I just had on Gabby Southern Dice, and she was talking about, it was those two, and she went to the one that had an open thing, and it's those things, they're such moments of fate, right? But then that dictates your entire life.
Absolutely.
So then, okay, I would love to hear about your deployment to Iraq, because I know that when you were there, you were working with local forces, doing counterterrorism work. Can you tell me a bit about the partner forces you were working with and how you felt about your Iraqi counterparts when you were there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was in Iraq right around like 2009, 2010, 2011 timeframe. And it was an interesting line of work. I think it was probably my first time that I had actually done anything specific to counterterrorism, other than maybe like stand up and give talks. So it was kind of interesting to see it from the other side. It was also one of the first times I had ever worked with a partner force that wasn't in the Pacific theater, so it was kind of interesting to learn a different culture at the same time that I'm trying to learn a new job, while I'm also trying to not, mess up too bad. And so it was also the first time I had ever dealt with the Arabic culture. So there was a lot of initial, I don't know what I'm allowed to do. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. So I'm just going to follow the person next to me and hope that we together maybe we'll be okay. But most of my interactions with my I'm going to call them counterparts, but that's probably not the right word, was very, very nice. They were very welcoming people. We had a lot of jokes. Some of them spoke some English, some didn't. I didn't speak any Arabic, so it's not like I had any room to judge them. So we definitely relied on our interpreters that were there, and we had a lot of fun. I think probably the one thing I remember the most is that I didn't realize how strong Arabic tea or chai actually is. And so we went and we had a partner meeting where we sat down. It happened every so often, but our partner really wanted to sit down and talk with us. And so I'm sitting in this room and I'm drinking the chai. It's really good because it was kind of cold outside, so it was nice, it was warm. But I worked days. And if you've never had Iraqi chai, then you're in for a treat when you do, but don't do it at 4 p.m. when you have to get up and work the next morning. I was so amped. I felt like I took pre-workout. I worked out for 2 hours straight and felt a wreck the next morning. So yeah.
Learned a bit about the local tea. Yeah,
Sure
that's
did.
funny. I've never had the local chai. Although I was taught Arabic by an Iraqi woman, I should have asked her to bring us some chai. So Iraq was a pleasant experience. And then when did you head to Afghanistan to be an air advisor? Was that before or after your Iraq deployment?
It was after. So
Okay.
I ended up going as an air advisor from about 2015 to 2016. I was only there 6 months. Yeah, and I was a female air advisor. Obviously, I'm Air Force, so at that time there really weren't too many women in the Air Force, so my counterparts were male. There was a little bit of concern that maybe there might be some issues because I'm female, working with my male counterparts in a very Islamic heavy culture. So not only did my counterparts express concern to that with the guy that I was replacing, but he was also a little bit concerned too. And so we spent probably the first, I don't know, week of turnover making sure that everybody was okay with this. Everybody was good to go with what was going to happen, regardless of whether or not everybody was comfortable. But in my very first meeting, sitting down with them, we could tell like it just wasn't going to be an issue. A counterpart was super welcoming, very happy, huge warm smile. Brought out the chai, and I instantly remembered my workout in Iraq, and I was like, oh no, here we go again. But yeah, luckily it was still early in the morning. But yeah, loved my counterparts, phenomenal guys. Wish I had an opportunity to work with them again.
Yeah, well, what else, the connections that you built, how were you building them? What would you do on duty, off duty, etc.? Everyone talks about how welcoming and lovely the Afghan people were. Is that also what your experience was?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was the only one that was in my position. We were kind of out a little bit, away from what's considered the flagpole or like the main base. And so we didn't really have a whole lot of manning to support a whole lot of options, but at the same time, we recognized that these guys needed training just like we were there to learn about them. They were there to learn about us, and hopefully maybe together we would figure something out that would work for them. And so I would go from advising during the day to doing reports and planning the next day's training for my guys, to doing schoolwork, to attending more meetings, to maybe getting a workout in either at night or during the morning. So I was pretty busy.
Wow, that does sound really busy. Did I ask yet where you were? I feel like I didn't ask where you were deployed to in 15-16.
No, so I was down in Kandahar Airfield.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, had a blast. Yeah, like there's obviously with any trip to an area that people, whether they were on base or off base, don't like you, like you're still going to run into the same issues. But for the most part, my guys were pretty solid. I think probably the best advice I'd ever received was to act like you were running for mayor anytime you crossed across the line to go onto the Afghan side. So I think between that piece of advice and then just the professionalism of my counterparts really kind of made sure that most of us got home, or all of us got home safe.
So when they said that, they meant, go press flash and like say hi to everybody and make
Absolutely.
sure that they know that you feel good about being around them and like instilling that, hey, we're all friends here kind of mentality.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's grand advice for anybody. What about, did you ever get to go beyond the wire, or were you pretty much stuck to CAF?
So we would go over to the Afghan side quite a lot, because that's where they worked. It didn't make sense to not go. As far as like going off outside of CAF proper, yeah, there were some times in our mission that we would go out for some training stuff and have to venture out. But yeah, kind of going back to being in their office space. I think probably one of my favorite stories, I've got two of them. One, whenever they would come into my office, which was on their side, I would always have some sort of music playing, and we would sit down and we would talk because I wanted to practice their English. And so I had Jack Johnson playing, and they were like, oh, this is really kind of, obviously, like, they didn't say these words, but they were like, this is really mellow, kind of relaxing music. Who is this? So I told them, and they were like, oh, well, who is he? And so I told them, hey, he's a musician from Hawaii. These are just kind of like feel-good music, kind of giving them a little bit of a break in that culture. And so we got to talking about, Hawaii is big for surfing, it's big for swimming, it's big for scuba diving. And we got stuck on the topic of scuba diving and snorkeling. And I was explaining to them, hey, it's not uncommon for us to run into sharks when we're out there. It's their ocean. And they go, sharks? Well, wait, what? And so then we explain, hey, if you're swimming, they're really dangerous, but if you're scuba diving, it's totally fine. And it just blew them away that, we voluntarily went to swim next to these huge monsters with these scary teeth. So that was really entertaining to just see kind of that culture mix. The other thing is I went over to one of their offices one day, and the good water warmer or tea kettle was missing, and they were really upset. Oh man, they were angry. And I was like, well, hey guys, it's okay. We don't always have to drink chai. Like, I've got a bottle of water. Like, we're fine. We don't need it. But they were very adamant that we were going to have chai because that's what we do. And I was like, okay. And so one of my counterparts went and found this one from back in I'm going to hope it wasn't trash, but I'm not really sure. Because there was no plug on the end. And so he pulls it apart, and he's whittling away at the end of the line to pull off all the plastic. And then he takes it one end, and plugs it into the wall. I'm like, no, don't do that. And so it gives him a zap. And I'm not laughing, but they are. And he goes, oh, I'm finally awake now. I was like, oh, my Lord.
Oh, no, he didn't need the chai after that.
Exactly. He was good.
Whew, that's funny. So it was a positive experience then until, you didn't get to keep up with that whole deployment. You had a family emergency back home, and I know you said that was a really hard early departure. Can you talk about what was hard about it? Obviously, having relatives sick at home is hard, but you struggled to leave your people.
Yeah. So kind of backing up a little bit, right around the time that I received news that my dad had terminal cancer and he wasn't expected to be around too much longer, one of my more senior counterparts had pulled me aside, and he was like, hey, morale is really bad here. I don't know what to do to make my people feel happy. I want them to enjoy their work and see the importance. And so we sat there and we talked back and forth, and I was racking my brain for a couple of days while I was also trying to figure out what was going on at home. And we eventually came to the idea of, sometimes it's nice just to tell people thank you and give them an opportunity to rest. And so that's kind of what we ended up doing with the junior counterpart. So we were like, sweet, these guys are all happy. They're having a great time. One of the guys that had, we had some ill feelings about, maybe he was kind of on the fence about whether or not he supported the U.S. mission. He came up to me after, and he expressed just how much having somebody in his leadership tell him thank you was. So we're like, sweet, we got a great win. Everything's good. And so then I focused back on my family and found out, whatever was making my dad sick ended up being terminal cancer. And so I was like, okay, well, what do I do now? I've got an increased threat on some of the people I work with. I'm the only one that knows because I'm the only one in that position. And so you're sitting there, you're trying to think, what do I do? Do I leave these guys and try to pursue the route of a Red Cross mission and let them kind of figure it out on their own and let them go into an environment that they don't know about? Or do I stay? Which is more important, the life and the respect of one or the life and the respect of however many people we had? And so I was really, really struggling with this. And I didn't know what to do. My partners had an idea of what was going on, and they were talking to me about this. And one of my partners pulled me aside and said, hey, we would love for you to stay, but you need to go home. That's your dad. And I was like, hey, man, you're one of the only other people that know why I'm staying. I can't do that. I can't leave my other advisors. I can't, if something happens, I can't, that's not going to work for me. It's just, I'm going to be in a lot of mental trouble. And they looked at me and they were very, very cautious in the way that they said this, but it was very heartfelt. They told me, it's a great honor if you would let us protect your friends while you're gone. And then when you're done and everything's okay with your family, then maybe come back. But until then, please go home. And so if they wouldn't have assured me that somebody was going to be there that knew what was going on, that could protect my coworkers, I probably wouldn't have gone. And so, yeah. So I went home.
And then that is not the end of the, emotional moments too, because you received this huge greeting at the airport, and that was also kind of heavy for you. And can you talk about why that was? I think this is something that civilians try, right? They try to thank service members and veterans, and I think we often fall short because we don't think of how it's perceived. And I think this is one of those instances, and I just hope that people are listening and thinking about what they could do that would maybe be better received. I'll let you talk now.
Yeah, so it was kind of interesting. I had deployed before. I had gone on a lot of TDYs and stuff overseas, so traveling didn't really bother me. On the way out to Iraq, it was really kind of odd. I had never stopped anywhere where they had kind of set up a small going away party for us. And so we went to a layover, and we got off the plane because they needed to refuel us so we can continue our journey. And same kind of reception that I got when I came home. There were people there, they were cheering, there was music, they had goodie bags for us, they had all this stuff for us. And it felt weird. It felt really kind of dooming. And I was there with people that had never deployed, and so I didn't want to let them know, like, hey, some service members are superstitious. I try to pretend like I'm not, but I'm pretty superstitious, especially when it comes to the last couple of things you do before you go. If you had success in one, why break it? And so that to me stood out as really odd. And it kind of, whether or not the two are related, I don't know, but my first night in Afghanistan, we ended up having double-digit rocket attacks. So a large volley of rockets came into our base, and it was the largest that they had had for a little while. And so I was like, ooh, I bet. And I was like, no, you're just being superstitious. And so I didn't really think too much about it, and it's just like, okay, you got to appreciate what they did. It was really nice. But on my way home, I had a lot going on. I was still really upset that I had left my counterparts. I was really upset that I had left my coworkers. I was still very worried about them. I was also still really worried about whether or not I'd make it home for my dad before he passed. I knew my sister needed me. It's a lot to carry, especially by yourself when you've got family members that are constantly asking, what do I do? And so I was sitting here toying with all of this stuff. The guilt of leaving early, the guilt of not being there to help my sister earlier, all of this stuff's going on in my head. And so we get to the first U.S. port or U.S. airport, and I'm walking out, and you have to fly in uniform when you're on military aircraft. And so I'm walking out, and I've still got a bazillion things running through my head. I am not in the headspace to, get a warm hug and welcome homes. And so I'm walking out, and I'm listening. I'm like, what is that noise? Why is somebody? What a weird place to have a concert. And so I'm walking out, and you start seeing these civilians are lined all along the hallways. There's banners, there's balloons, there's streamers. A band is playing, and they're clapping, and they're just cheering for you. And it felt really weird. It felt like they were treating us like we had just won the local championship football game, and I didn't know how to perceive it. It just left you with a really weird kind of, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this, so I'm just going to wave and run for mayor. And so that's kind of what I did. And and it took a little while, and I didn't know how to respond to it. But after a while of thinking on it, I think that was probably just the best way that they knew how to say thank you. And so it took a little while to be okay with it. But at the same time, my experience probably was not shared by everybody that came through those corridors.
Yeah, but I can't think of a single experience where it's like, anybody who's either left a combat zone or left something, I'm thinking about all the people I talked to, infantry Marines. I used to date an infantry Marine, and I had this opportunity to interview him long after we dated. And he was talking about the decompression period from leaving Afghanistan and just how when he got home he had all these plans and he couldn't do any of it. He was just so drained from that experience. And you know, you just don't think that these things weigh on you, and what you're doing is really difficult, and you want to celebrate. I can understand. I'm a civilian. I can understand wanting to celebrate what you did and what everyone goes and does in the name of our country, but I think we need to find a way to do it that that is more respectful of the weight that might have been carried over there. So I think that's a really valuable story just for that aspect. But now I want to get into the meat and potatoes of some of the really hard stuff, because this is hard. I mean, these are hard things, right? But you were really impacted by the withdrawal from Afghanistan in a personal way and in so many ways. So I want to fast forward there to, you know, what life was like for you as August 2021 was rolling towards you, and how things changed as we drew closer to the final departure date for U.S. troops.
Yeah, so I was in a senior NCO position at the time, so I had subordinates I needed to make sure we're okay. I had a lot going on at work by itself. Lots of important projects we needed to get done, lots of personnel stuff that needed to happen. There was just a lot going on, and our office was really busy at that time. So August was not an appreciated month for that reason. But starting in around July, I had loosely started following what was going on. Having been there, I think it made it a little bit more like, okay, I see what's happening, and this is going to get bad, and it's going to get bad really quick. And at that time, I didn't know what to do, so I didn't do anything. I wasn't sure what I was legally allowed to do. I didn't know. And so mid-August rolled around, and at this point in time, anybody that believed that maybe there was a chance, they had to have realized at this point that it was done. And so I started getting requests, and I started reaching out to my Afghans, my interpreters that were either still there or had family members there, to figure out what was going on. I was like, hey guys, I don't know what I'm legally allowed to do, but I'm going to try something. I don't know what I can try yet, so we're just, what do we need to do? Do we need to get these guys to Pakistan? Is there another place that we can go? What do we need to do? And they were just as clueless as I was. And so finally an email came out from the Air Advisor leadership. I say finally, but it was only like a day or two later. But when you're watching like your friends go through pure hell, you don't know what to do. And so 2 days feels like probably 20 years. And so we finally get the letter or the email explaining what we can do and what we can't do. But they were just as like, oh my gosh, this is happening. We're not ready for this. And so I don't fault them for not having all the stuff that I've learned over the course of 3 years. Number one, our job was never to be immigration lawyers. Number two, we weren't really set up to do anything with refugees or pull people out or anything like that. That's not really what our job was. So I think we were all kind of learning together. But it very much felt like we were building a ship that had already gone out to sea while we were still chasing after the ship to continue to put sails on the ship and wood on the bows and whatever else we needed to do. So it was super chaotic. So I would go from working long hours during my normal job to moving back to trying to figure out how to help my Afghans. Once I finally found out that I was legally allowed to do this, I did what senior NCOs and NCOs in general do best, which is start cold calling people you think might be able to help you. So I get on the phone, I'm calling random people, trying to figure out, hey, I've got these people over here, this is what they did, this is why we need to pull them out. What can we do? And they were like, okay, let me pull on my side. And so that's kind of how the initial week went. I finally ended up finding some people on social media, that specifically Facebook, that were also kind of in the same boat of, hey, I got dudes, we got to move them, like they're coming. These guys have Taliban chasing behind them as they're running. And so we started working together. There was a small group of us, maybe it started out with like 6 of us, and we each had our own little stake in the party. My coworkers started to see that my days would go from early morning normal work to no lunch to no breaks to an hour to go home to let my dogs out, feed them, and then come right back, to however long I needed to be there at night, because all correspondence had to come through an official channel. And so in order to do that, I had to go into work. And so I would be doing all of that stuff, and they could see it. They knew I was starting to get tired, and they knew I was starting to get a little bit overwhelmed. I actually had a whiteboard up behind me where I'd write the names of the people, the locations of the people I was trying to help, so that I could try to keep track of it. Not only did I have the whiteboard at work, but I also had Post-it notes all over my house at home. So I was surrounded by what was going on at all points in time so that I didn't mess up, because I didn't know what I was supposed to do. And so eventually 2 of my coworkers started to realize what was going on. They stepped in and they helped out with some of the paperwork, and they helped me get some of these packages pushed in for P1 consideration. Again, none of us knew what we were doing. We just had a random checklist, and so that's what we filled out, and that's what we sent in, hoping that our guys would win the lottery and get on that plane. And so that's kind of what ended up happening. When we weren't filling out paperwork, I would help set up. So we had a couple of guys that were running, and so as they were running from the Taliban, they would be on social media with me. Hey, I don't know where I'm supposed to go. I don't know where I'm supposed to go. So we would try to help plan their evacuation route using social media and whatever information we had. So it was super chaotic. We were basically running a rescue cell off of social media, which is a terrible plan to do. And so eventually it got to the point where my own coworkers started to realize that I wasn't eating lunch because I was so busy and I couldn't break. So they would start sneaking me food like I was in prison. They would come up and they would hand me food. They'd just set it on my desk and walk away. So like, I super appreciated that. I appreciated all the warm thoughts. But yeah, it was a rough couple of days. I think towards the end of August, I got a text message. I want to think it was like 11 or 12 at night here, and it said, "Hey, right now, anybody that makes it to Abbey Gate, they're letting in. Send your guys now." I had a family that was over at, I believe, North Gate at that time. I was like, "Hey, guys, I don't know who's in the area. I know we've tried to come a couple of times. You all have been recognized, so whatever you do, just make sure you're hidden and nobody recognizes who you are. But I'm hearing this is it. If you don't make it through the gate, I'm going to tell you those planes are going to leave and you're not going to be on it. I don't know what we're going to do at that point, but I feel like this is probably your last option." And so I sent this text message out to all of the guys I was helping, and I went to bed. Probably around 2, I get a text message from one of my interpreters that's there. He's like, "Hey, we're going. We're going to take your advice. We're going. And I was like, "Okay, man, just be careful, be safe, watch your family, and best of luck. Let me know when you get through." So then I fall back asleep, and then I get a phone call, and I had been asleep maybe 30 minutes, and I will tell you that was probably one of the hardest phone calls / messages that I had received. It was the notification that the Abbey Gate bombing had happened, and I had just sent all of my partners, all of my counterparts, and my interpreters and their families all to this gate. So I felt like absolute shit. I thought I had just killed all of my partners, because I didn't do what we knew to do, which is always validate your information. And so all morning I had to sit there and I had to go to work and I had to pretend like everything was okay, but I felt terrible. I felt like I was a terrible leader. I felt like I was a terrible human being. I felt like I failed everybody at this point. And so I was sitting at my desk, I was working, and of course, like I'm doing what I can do, and I get up and I go outside to check my phone, and I'm asking people, "Hey, can you check in? Please let me know, did your family go? And if they did, are they okay?" And so I finally started getting messages around 11 o'clock. Hey, my family's good. They couldn't make it. They couldn't get it through the checkpoint, or no, they were recognized, so they had to run. So I'm running through and I'm finally getting my check-ins and I'm starting to feel a little bit better. But my interpreter, I never got a response from him. And this was the one that had his family in tow and they were going to go. And so I'm sitting there, I'm like, oh my God, I'm almost positive I got him killed. And so I'm sitting there and I'm waiting and I'm waiting and I'm waiting. And then I started getting messages from somebody else telling me, hey, just to let you know, a family with an interpreter were captured by the Taliban. And they started talking about what was happening to that family. And I was like, oh my God, I didn't get him killed. I got him caught, tortured, and now he's going to die in captivity. And so I'm sitting here and I'm thinking all of this stuff. And I'm like, I don't know if he's dead. I don't know if he's being tortured to death in Taliban custody based on what the reports were. So I was sitting there trying to figure out what was going on for probably about a day and a half. And my interpreter and I had an agreement that if he did not respond back within 24 to 48 hours of our check-in windows, that we would assume he was kidnapped. Well, he missed the window. And I felt absolutely gutted because, you know, I'm the one that told him to go. And so we ended up having to go into my leadership's office, and I was like, hey, this is what happened. I don't know if I can make this call. I don't want to be the person that declares this dude's dead. And he's like, hey, you know, you got to protect your own network. Like, you got to make the call. And so I did. We ended up contacting some of the groups he was in and saying, hey, you know, we're pretty sure this dude got captured by the Taliban. You need to kick him out of your group, or you're going to run the risk of him blowing up the groups. Not physically, just like infiltrating. And so that's kind of what was going on for a while. I also found out that one of my interpreters had also recommended to a buddy to go to Abbey Gate because of the recommendation I got, and he was killed in the blast. And so I was sitting here trying to figure out how to deal with all of this stuff. And at the same time, one of the Marines I was working with had told me, you know, hey, I don't know what to do. And I said, well, what do you mean? What's going on? And she was one of the people that had helped me with my P1 packages. So she was kind of invested because she saw it was important to me. And she goes, you know, this is my first friend I've lost in combat, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I said, well, what do you mean? And so we got to talking, and we figured it out. And just to see that the same feeling that I had back in 2003, 2004, watching my own friends die in a theater, that I wasn't there, seeing it on her face, it was kind of like, wow, this sucks. This absolutely sucks. And so that's kind of what happened up until the Abbey Gate bombing. Good news for the interpreter was that eventually, like, I got word that he did make it out. He is resettled. He and his family are totally fine. But it really sucked that couple of days. You're probably gonna ask about the last plane departure from Kabul, and that day sucked too. So I was sitting at work. I was in early because that's what I had to do. And I had a coworker that was there. We both worked super early and worked super late. And so I'm sitting there on my computer. I'm trying to get through this brief that I had to give in just a little bit of time. I was working on this report. And in the background, you could hear the words, you know, hey, last military aircraft departing Kabul. And I couldn't do anything. I just sat there, put my hands on my desk, and I just looked down. It felt like the entire room had just collapsed on me and somebody kicked me in the chest. I was absolutely gutted at that moment. I knew at that point that getting any of my allies out was probably going to take an act of God. And it absolutely sucked. And so I just sat there for a minute with my head down, and I couldn't move. I couldn't look at anything. I just sat there. And my coworker came up to me and he put his hand on my shoulder and he goes, hey, I get it. I know. And then he turned around and he walked away. He had gone through something similar when he was in. And so at that point in time, like, it felt like maybe there was one person in that entire building that actually understood what I was going through. And I tried to hide it, but I did have one single tear that kind of fell from my face. I wiped it off real quick so nobody could see. But I think at that moment, just the absolute feel that there is nothing you could do, and all hope left with that last plane. That's kind of that was tough.
Did you do any? I very briefly volunteered with Operation Op 620, and they were, like many of those groups, pursuing these overland routes, trying to use Tajikistan or trying to get people to Mez, to get flights out from Mez. Were you doing that as well and trying to find those other options, or did you? And I will say up front, for anybody who doesn't already know this, like those options were not really bearing fruit for most people. So, in a lot of cases, you'd move people overland, have to go through Taliban checkpoints, scare the shit out of the people who were trying to avoid the Taliban, and end up just riling people up and then having to bring them back to Kabul and find them safe houses and get them through the same Taliban. Like, it was a freaking mess. But were you pursuing any of those overland or Mez routes?
So by the time that the last plane took off, I had just over 30 guys that I was trying to figure out how to move. And we had a collective agreement that they had the ultimate say over their own destiny, but I was just going to advise and see what I could do from my side. We looked at some of those land routes, but our problem was it seemed like all of the Taliban around their areas where they were already hiding up knew who they were. So I had one guy that we were looking at maybe trying to get out on one of those land routes. Again, they all wanted to do it legal. They all wanted to be legit, because even though their country had fallen apart and there were dudes literally trying to kill them, they felt it was still their duty and their honor to uphold integrity in what they did. So I was really proud of them for that. But it definitely made it harder to get these guys out, and none of them have. I'm still at 0 all the way across the board. But yeah, we looked at some of those land routes. We couldn't make it happen.
Yeah, I wouldn't have wanted to. If I were known, I would never have wanted to do that, because it's just too easy for somebody to get pulled off those buses and executed. So
yeah,
there were too many scary stories that I heard that I should get those people on this podcast to tell them. It's really important that those stories are told. But I can totally understand it. So you're 0 for 30 still to this day. None of those people have gotten out.
We'll do a small number adjustment on that, but kind of backing up to your story about how easy it is for some of these guys to get recognized. One of my guys was wrapped up. He had a scarf all the way around his head, so you could only see his eyes. And he went out to the market because his family needed food. And so he thought, hey, no problem. We're going to make it out. It's all going to be good. Somebody recognized him. And the Taliban members came out and they were jumping. Man, they were just going for it. And somebody thought, some bystanders saw what was going on. And they ran over. They're like, stop beating this old man. Stop beating this old man. My guy's crafty, and he figured out how to wiggle his way out of the chaos and ended up making it out. But it goes back to, like you were saying, it doesn't matter. You might think that nobody's going to recognize you, but it only takes one movement, especially if they don't like you, and they're going to find you. Like, they're going to do it. But yeah, what was your
what I'd love to know, that was the 0 for 30, but I want to talk about the paths that you tried to use to get those people out, because that's something I've been covering this entire time, because that's the other thing. Everybody's like, oh, well, we've all done humanitarian parole. We've all put in for P1, P2. We've all put in for SIV for, eligible Afghans. And like none of those things has panned out the way that they were supposed to for the vast majority of applicants. So let's talk about the paths that you used, or the non-path entities, for a bit.
Yeah, so I ended up, at the end of August, I had right around 30 people I was trying to help. By the end of December of 2021, I had over 300 I was trying to help. To date, I am down to less than 75, which means I'm 25%. That's a failing grade if you were going to school, for those that don't math well. And so that just tells you I'm 0 for 300.
Yeah.
As a person that's used to winning, that's a hard pill to swallow. I tried the SIV path. I've got one person that's had his KBL number since 2019, and we can't get him out. I had a couple that were approved, 2 were denied. I tried the P1, P2 path. We got some approved, some denied. I had a person that we were trying to submit for P2 through UN work. It was one of the females that worked in their office, and the UN pretty much told us to pound sand because they don't get involved in that stuff. So we had no pathway for them. The humanitarian paroles, we had some that had submitted it well before the country started to fall in. We had some that submitted shortly after the beginning of July when the writing was kind of on the wall. Of that group, most of them have not been approved. I had 7 that were part of that blanket denial without any sort of justification. So we had been trying to figure out for a while why these guys were denied so that we could resubmit and have a competitive package. But we couldn't get the answer. So eventually it got to the point where the Taliban did end up finding the primary, the reason why they were all at risk. They detained him, and some bad things happened, and he ended up passing away from that captivity. So that made it pretty hard to be like, all right, so this is a really solid system, knowing that for 2 years somebody could have explained what happened, and we could have got this guy and his family set up on this program that's literally created to help that. Then we also tried doing some of the family reunification stuff. That is still stalled. And then we also tried some out-of-the-box options, looking at pathways into Australia, maybe getting him involved in some of the military that they were trying to recruit for. We tried Canada, Israel, basically any of the countries that didn't have a visa requirement is what we tried. We explored STEM, so this science fields, because I had a couple of guys that had that. So we tried looking for those types of jobs. We tried looking for jobs of people that, that nobody wanted to fill or they needed to be filled. We looked at medical jobs. We looked at student visas. And then ultimately we also tried any sort of religious routes that we could go. All of them turned up nothing. So yeah, it was a very frustrating loss.
That is just obscene, like to go down that many paths. And so is that why the attrition, why you went from, and I want to clarify, those 300 were the primary applicants, right? Not like
no
primary
families.
applicant plus family. Okay.
I want
to
think,
but now you've got
yeah, I would guess that out of the 300, if you maybe, it seems like every Afghan family has 5 people. So if we just do, public math, that's about 60.
60 families. So now you're probably at around 15?
About.
Oh no, God, I can't do. Yeah, 15 times 5. Yeah, don't
That's
ask me
okay.
to do public math. Ew, gross. So that's still, and those people chose to stop asking for help because they just lost the faith that there was going to be any help for them.
So some of them lost hope. Some of them tried to run. Some of them are no longer with us.
Here's a question, and I did not tell you I was going to ask you this beforehand, and it's just something that I've seen a lot. Have you seen any Afghan women leaving their husbands because there is no hope, there is no path, their husbands can't have a job in the Taliban's Afghanistan, and so there's now a divorce happening because of the withdrawal and all the side effects? Because I've seen it in 2 of the families that I've grown close to.
I saw a family split, but that was primarily because they were both wanted by the Taliban and they had greater odds that they split. But as far as families, like husband and wives splitting, to my knowledge, none of my guys have done that. They've got friends, that they said, hey, so-and-so, he just left, his wife left him, what do I do? I said, well, don't get involved because now you're going to be on the Taliban radar. Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's another example of the kinds of things that are happening, that we don't even get the view into really unless you're doing this kind of work, and it just, all of those things begin to weigh on you. And that's what I want to talk about especially is the way that it weighed on you. So in the middle of all of this, you were training for an Ironman. How did all of this impact had you done any before, I guess, is another question that I have. And how did this change everything with your Ironman routine?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. Before August of 2021, I had always wanted to do a full Ironman and a half Ironman all by myself. I had done them in relays before, and relays are always a lot of fun, but I had never done it by myself. I have over 25 full marathon and half marathons under my belt, as well as some other like Olympic and sprint size triathlons. So I loved it. I loved the challenge. I loved all of it. The community was always great. That was perfect for me. You got outside, you got to explore stuff, you got to be with people that were also kind of in the same genre as you, if you will. So I finally was at a point where I felt like I had the time to train. I had the finances to invest in proper training as well as proper nutrition, and I finally got, I was set up. My last deployment, I made sure that I had enough to have a comfortable rest of my time. And so I thought for sure I was going to I had a good shot at it. I was like, sweet, I had a couple of injuries before that had taken me out, but this year I had the right coach. Everything was lined up. It looked really good. And then August 2021 happened, and all of that kind of shit the bed. So that was kind of fun. I think for me, a lot of it was I wasn't sleeping, I wasn't recovering, I wasn't resting, I wasn't doing anything. I would get up, I would go do my training because that is what was expected of me. My coworkers expected it of me because I already told them I was going to go do these races. My coach wanted me to do these. Everybody wanted me to do this stuff, and so I knew that was what was expected of me. So regardless of how I felt, I would get up and I would go do this. Then I would come home and I'd get ready for work, and I would go to work, and then I'd spend all day at work, and then I would spend the evenings, however long it needed to be, dealing with whatever fires were going on the Afghan side. And then I'd come home and I'd start it all over again. So that's not really a plan for success. So there was one point in time where I was out on a run and I broke. I couldn't do it anymore. I was on the run, and I was having a decent run. I was okay with it. The pace wasn't what I wanted, but it was in line or close to the mark that we were going for. And I knew that I was not really performing the way I thought I should be. My coach was also kind of on the fence. She didn't understand what was going on. And so I was okay with what was going on the run. It was a pretty decent run. And it was probably the last one that I laced up my shoes and was excited to go on. On my run, I ended up getting a phone call from one of my guys saying, hey, the Taliban just kidnapped my family and they're coming after me. I don't know where to go. What street do I need to run down? And I'm like, well, I'm currently running down a street, man. Maybe don't run down my street, but let's talk about where you are. And so I had to stop what I was doing, and it was a hot day, so I'm dripping with sweat, and I'm still kind of breathing heavy because I just finished a sprint, and now I've got the adrenaline of trying to help this guy escape capture so that later we could, heal his wounds of what had just happened, and then try to go figure out how to rescue this family. And so that kind of sealed the deal on how I viewed most runs after that. I would find I'd have a lot of panic attacks when I'd get ready to go work out, but I had to do it because that's what was expected of me, and I couldn't let anybody down. And so I found myself doing that, and I found less and less joy in what I was doing, and I felt more and more responsible for how people perceived, or how I felt they perceived, my inability to do what I was set up to do.
It was an inhuman amount of things, though,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the thing and I never saw that either until someone pointed it out to me, that you can't keep this up. You can't do it. It's going to wreck you. And you ran into that.
Mm-hmm.
that's a bad term, but I mean,
Yeah, I
you
still
ran
have that.
into that like head on, and that wasn't it either. I mean, even your eating changed based on your volunteer work. And can you talk more about what you were eating and why at the height of your involvement in this effort?
Absolutely. So kind of going back a quick second, with those panic attacks, I still get those to this day. So for anybody out there that's still like, I don't understand why I haven't moved past this, just know you're not, it's not just you. There's other people that are still going through all of this stuff, and we still don't know why we can't move forward. But just know that at least you're not moving forward with other people. But as far as the diet goes, I had gotten to a point where I was eating the cheapest food I could find and just enough so that I didn't crash. And so I was eating maybe 2 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches a day while I was still training for Ironman, while I was still doing all my work and all this other stuff. And it's because I couldn't live with myself if I went and I bought the food that I know I needed. I had family members in Afghanistan, not my personal family members, but members of my partners, that their kids were starving to death. So I would call and we would have our discussions, and I'd hear their kids in the background. Some people were like, oh, it's staged, but it wasn't staged. How do I know? Because they would show me, they would ask me, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. He's hurt, but I don't know how he's hurt. Can you help me? And so we would try to look over on the phone and try to figure out what was going on. What was malnutrition? The kids' organs were shutting down. And so to me, anytime I would go to the store, I would instantly feel this incredible amount of guilt if I picked up, say, a banana or an apple that was, $2. That was $2 that could go towards an Afghan family where their kid's knocking on death's door. The kids didn't do anything. They don't deserve this. So it felt really selfish to do anything but that. And it took my coach and a friend of mine who's a nutrition to point out, hey, the reason why you're not performing in your training and you're feeling like absolute dog crap is because you're taking in like a 20th of the calories that you need to do in order to do this. This is not sustainable. You're gonna do some serious damage. And so eventually we got to the point where working with both of them, we were able to move forward. But unfortunately, like, we still haven't dealt with the panic attacks and stuff like that anytime I try to work out. So still working on that.
It's so tough. And yeah, I had the same thing. Oh, well, how do you know that the people you're buying food packages for aren't just using you? It's like, have you looked into the situation? I'm pretty sure that I might be more expert on it than you. And honestly, if somebody's going to take advantage of me for food and groceries, like, okay,
Whoa.
so what? Like,
Yeah.
if what's the other option, that they really need it and that me not doing it means they're not going to eat it. It really hit ahead for me when someone I still try to help to this day. In fact, right before we started recording, I got a message from him about he can't get his supervisor still to give him an LOR, and he's in hiding away from his family, but his wife had a baby shortly after the withdrawal, and he was like, we don't have any food. And I just thought about having, when I had my kids and postpartum and just all of the things you have to worry about. And I thought, God, like, can you imagine being that way and not having food? And I said, forget it. Like, here you go. I'm going to get on a seal and send you a package. Like, and I've done that now for the last 2 years. And is it an easy thing to do as a single mom? You bet your ass it's not. And in fact, at this point, I've had to say, like, I can't do it anymore. And it's the worst feeling because it is the worst feeling. It's just the worst. I mean, it's so hard. All of this is so hard. It weighs on you so heavily. And for you, I know you've put a lot more of your finances into it than I have. How did that impact you, and are you still having to recover from that now?
Yeah, so oddly enough, it's an interesting segue. Azil, awesome program.
Yeah.
Love the guy. He's done some amazing work, and that group has really helped out some of my families as well. But it does, just like you brought up, you can only do it for so long. I ended up clearing out my bank account twice. You just get to a point where you're like, who am I as an individual to say that my life's more important than these? At that time, I think I had 300 individuals I was trying to help. So you don't think about it that way. You're like, I have to do this because no one else is doing this. Somebody else made a promise and they're not delivering on it. And I'm getting these calls, they're not. I'm being told, hey, my family is starving, your country is failing me. And you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. So you do exactly like we always do, which is figure out a way to make it happen. And so that's what I was doing. I think there was a point in time towards when I actually retired, and I was starting a program called Skill Bridge, which for anybody out there that's getting ready to retire from the military, highly recommend that program. It will help you with your transition so that you don't feel so tied to your military identity that you can't make that break. But I was on Skill Bridge and I needed help. I didn't know I needed help, but I was in a really bad state of mind. And I was talking with Kate K, which most people know, and I couldn't do anything about it. I was just sitting there in this bad spot, and she's like, hey, friend, you need to go get help. And I told her I can't. Who am I to give up this money that needs to go to my families? I can't do this. Like, I can't do it. Like, I just got to sit here and deal with it because, number one, I'm military. We grew up in the 9/11 generation. You don't go get help. Number two, that money can go to their families. Yeah, they need it more than I do. And she's like, okay, friend, let's talk this through. And so eventually she got to the point where she convinced me to go and get some help. But yeah, without her making me realize, hey, you've drained your bank account twice and you're circling death's door. You got to figure this out, pal, because you're not going to make it too much longer, and then nobody's going to help your Afghans. I think that was really kind of the turning point for me where I realized, oh, she's right.
It's so hard, though, and I feel like it can't come from somebody who's not in the community and doesn't understand exactly what you're going through and belittles, and maybe not belittles, but just doesn't. They're not getting those calls, right? They're not getting the texts. They're not inundated with the despair. So
Yep.
Hearing it from somebody like Kate, it just is more impactful. And Kate is so good at that. I can hear her saying it. Hey, friend. I can just hear it. I love Kate. And I'm glad that she did that for you. But it is really hard. It's almost like reprogramming yourself to go, hold on. Because it's the whole, and my mom and I talk about this often, the oxygen mask theory.
Yep.
If you don't put your oxygen mask on, you're not helpful to the other people who need your help. Like, that's why they say, you put yours on, and then you put your small child's on. Otherwise, they're screwed. They're never going to put your oxygen mask on for you. I know this personally as the owner of two small people. Yeah, I mean, you have to, and that, like I mentioned earlier in this episode, it was another evac volunteer who had done enormous things for other people who reminded me, like, we were talking about his work, and he just said, you need to, not like anybody who does this work needs to make sure that they take their time. He's like, you need to make sure you are getting mentally healthy. And it was very impactful, and he was right. But I never, you don't stop. You just have to reorient and figure out, how can I do this in a way that's more healthy for me and more sustainable. And, luckily it's like you get to the point where I feel like Afghans have learned now how they can survive for the most part, except for the ones that are still getting killed by the Taliban. That's the problem, honestly. Let's just forget everything I just said. Afghans are still being killed by the Taliban. Like, they've learned how to live inside their home and never leave it, and like live a life of a recluse and hope that there aren't any more, remember when they were doing all of the house-to-house searches for those times? Yeah. I had one dude, and his story will always kill me, and I really wanted to write a book about how Afghanistan pulled me in like a fucking vacuum. And I haven't done it yet, and one day I will. I can't yet because it still is. You know what I mean? Like, you can't write something while it's happening. But he was the first person. I would get all these people. They would send me their SIV documents. He sent me pictures of his kids, and it killed me because they look just like mine. You know, beautiful birthday shots, beautiful whatever. And then he sent me a picture of them in a tent in dingy clothing, looking like hell. And it broke my goddamn heart. And during those searches, he was living in a farm where he told people, yeah, I worked for the Afghan government. And he had to pay each of the workers at the farm to not tell the Taliban he was there. And he had to hide in a barrel of water for hours while they searched. Like, this is what we've done to people. So yeah, it's not okay, and it continues to be immense. No wonder you still have panic attacks. You still have to wonder, are these people going to be found? I haven't found them a way out yet. I feel like that has to have something to do with... Anyway, now I'm just like trauma dumping all the things. So this is so helpful. So helpful.
It's different when the person on the other end actually gets it, so...
Yeah, and that's the thing, is this is life or death, and it is very important, and it's just not easy to be doing it. It's not easy at all. It weighs on you very heavily. I don't know if there's anything more you want to talk about that experience. I want to hear it, but if not, I'd love to talk about the list you sent me of the things you want to see from the U.S. government, because, you know, I think if anybody deserves to ask for things from the U.S. government, it's people like you who have given so much and tried to work all those programs that they had.
So there is one thing I'll bring up before I get into my list. I did want to kind of circle back a little bit and talk about how I found my way out of doing all of this by myself. The first person that I reached out to and I networked with got me involved with one of the chat groups, Shepherd. So if anybody in that group is in that, thank you guys. That was probably the first step in actually making me realize that maybe it's not just me and like the 3 other people that I'm talking to. Everybody else is struggling and nobody else has the answer either. The very first elected official that I reached out to that finally responded back to me was Senator Duckworth's office, and I can't say enough. It was right after the pandemic. I was finally able to go over. I had bought my tickets and everything to go over and help with the Ironman World Championships in Hawaii. And I was sitting on my desk, or on the bed in the Airbnb, because the Ironman World Championship wasn't open yet, because we were still trying to figure out how to run an event with 10,000 people when we were still having problems with COVID. And so I was sitting on the bed, and I was pretty heartbroken. I didn't know what to do at this point. I was in a really bad spot, and then I got the email from one of her staff workers, and it made me feel better. And then through that, I was able to kind of continue on, and eventually I got hooked up with OSP, which is Operation Sacred Promise, and that's how I ended up meeting Kate and a whole bunch of other people. So just know, for especially those that are trying to get in here, just know that those groups may seem like they've been around for a little while, but that doesn't mean they're closed to you. Definitely talk to us. Some of us have been doing this for a little while. I myself have taught moral injury, disturbing content, and graphic images training for a couple of the advocates, and I'm more than happy to do it again. Just reach out. I can sit down. I can talk to you. I can talk to your group. Just let me know. Because that's what I know in December a lot of people were really struggling with, which kind of brings us to the ask. So I did actually write this down, so as I turn to my
Can we pause before you do that, actually? Because I totally forgot. I wanted to ask you about the graphic images, because when you described it in your message, and when we were talking about what we were going to talk about here, you mentioned it, and it hit me in the face, too, because I'm used to seeing those things now, and it is such a... At first, it's terrible. You don't want to see snuff videos and see pictures of dead Afghans, and it's horrifying. And I was telling my mom about a time when I was talking to the man whose family I now provide food packages to, and it was before that started. And all of a sudden, on the social media app we were using, I get this video, and it was of the Taliban chasing somebody through the house, and I believe they killed the person, and I didn't know. There was no explanation given. And I'm freaking out thinking, oh my God, the Taliban got on his social media and that's a video of them killing him. And now they know who I am. Mm-hmm. And he's dead. And it was so terrifying. I couldn't sleep. I was just, my heart was pounding out of my chest. And then I finally was like, okay, what am I going to do here? And I said, hey, what is that? You know? And he responded back a couple hours later, oh, it was something that happened to, and I'm like, thank goodness, you know, thank God it wasn't you. I haven't been outed. Just, you know, all of these things. And then the crazy thing is that over time, it's like, oh yeah, there's another dead Afghan. I have seen 100 dead Afghans now. And it stops having the same power to impact you, which then makes you feel like less of a human. And I don't know if that's your experience, but I would love to hear about your experience with that, because it's harmful, and I want to know more about what you tell people too about how to handle it.
Yeah, so most of my career in the military was counterterrorism. Like that's what we grew up doing, GWAT, Global War on Terrorism. Mm-hmm. So seeing the graphic content and the disturbing images and hearing the rough stories, that was something that we had a lot of experience doing. You would see the ISIS videos, you would see the Al-Qaeda videos, you would see all these terrible groups going out there and doing what it is that they feel they need to do. And so after a while, you learn how to kind of detach from it and not make it personal. So you would watch it, but make sure that not all of your senses were included into it. So it gave you an opportunity to kind of keep it at an arm's length. You also would try to avoid doing it right before bedtime. So even though I knew all of these practices and I knew what I was supposed to do, that it's all really great in theory until, exactly like you get the text at midnight and you're so conditioned to hear and listen for that phone because there's, 30 families depending on you. And one of them could hit you up randomly because our time zones are different, and maybe it's daytime and they're currently being chased again. And so you listen for the phone, you listen for the vibrations, even though you're sound asleep, you still get that stuff, and it draws you right back in. I had an instance where I received a video kind of like that, and it woke me up wide awake. There's a big difference between knowing what you're getting ready to see and being able to take that second to separate yourself from it, and then having that all of a sudden thrust upon you. If you're not able to prepare yourself, then it's going to be unbelievably hard to step back and not be so caught up in the moment. That for me, I know when I got the video, I was ready to get in my car, drive all the way across the ocean and go kick some ass. I was super pissed. Like, don't you ever do that to any of my friends. And I was ready. Like, I had my keys in my hand. I was still in my pajamas, but by God, I was going to go whoop somebody. And it took me a while to realize why I was so upset about that. Like, I had seen so many really bad videos in my career. But then I stopped and I thought about it, and I was like, you know what? Those videos, yeah, they still bother me from time to time. But it's the torture videos from the Taliban that are really, those are the ones that still bother me at night. When I have nightmares, it's not always the videos that I saw before. It is the videos that I got from these guys, because before it was somebody else. You were able to keep that nice distance, but as soon as it became somebody that that was going through some of this stuff, and you would see this and you would hear it and you'd experience it, it makes it way too real. So you can't do that separation. And so with that training, especially in December of 2021, when a lot of us were getting bombarded with that type of content, we started to realize a lot of people were in a lot of really bad situations. Some had thought about taking their lives. Some were really close to taking their lives. Others were, in and out of hospitals trying to figure out what they needed to do. Nobody understood what was going on. And so I gave that training based off of one location that I worked at that spent a lot of time looking at some of the, like you said, snuff films, to try to figure out, hey, what do we do to help try to combat the extremist mentality? And so I hit up my contact at that time. I was like, hey, not only am I seeing it in the drone sensors that I work with at my work, but I also see it in my volunteers. Can you help me out? I know this material's out there because you gave it to me while I was working with you. Can we get that? And so we were able to get that, kind of bring it to them, and help these guys kind of understand what they were looking at, why it was bothering them, and ultimately it introduced to a lot of people what the idea of moral injury was. And so once you realize that it's okay, like you're not weak, there's nothing you have done that could have prepared you for this, and it's still such an understudied, I'm going to call it a condition. It's still an understudied condition that no one really knows how to help. And so once people were able to kind of take a step back, realize what they could do to try to set those boundaries and understand that, no, you're completely valid in what you're thinking, I think a lot of people were like, okay, so number one, I'm not alone. Number two, I don't suck. Number three, I'm not weak. Number four, I'm not a failure. You're like, yes. So yeah.
Yeah, and that I think is the prevailing injury of this whole thing. I mean, it impacts service members who fought there. It impacts the HKIA veterans who were there at the end. It impacts all the volunteers. Like, that is the chief thing that I've taken away from the people I've talked with, and I think that's a great step. So now I'm glad we took that brief aside, but I'd love to hear your list, because I think it's everyone's list in a way.
Yeah, so first, I think it would be nice to have us reimbursed, not only for our finances, but our time as well. But in reality, if we sit down and we think about it, and I asked some of my other advocates, probably you would have the same response too. If they sat there and they reimbursed us for what we've spent, most of us are probably going to put it right back into our families, because if you give somebody $25,000 and they see an opportunity to save these people, that they've either known for 3 years, or in my case 13 years, of course we're going to take that money and we're going to try to save our people. So it's kind of a nice ask, but yeah, that'd always be appreciated. The next thing is transparency on the program. So the SIV program, the humanitarian, the P1, P2 process. There is so much misinformation and so many opportunities that it doesn't make sense. I grew up in America, I speak English, I understand the culture, and I can't navigate the system. There are days where I assume it's corrupt, and I get angry at it. So I can only imagine what an Afghan feels when they're going through this, and they're trying to navigate it, and their experience is their government is super corrupt. So having that transparency to let them know, hey, your case is here, your flight status is here, you are here, this is what is still missing, I think would be a huge help, and would help kind of plus up that system a little bit and maybe add some more credibility to it, because right now it honestly it feels chaotic, and it still feels very much like the lottery of the early days. Ownership. I think all of us would appreciate if maybe someone in power, whoever that may be, takes ownership for what they did. I adore Will, and if you follow his Twitter or his X, complete foot stop, everything he says. It's not just one administration, it's many administrations, it's many people that could have stepped up and said, hey, you know what, I screwed up. We get it. We're super sorry for what we did. Let's figure out a way forward. We're here with you. We didn't do it right the first time, but we're going to figure out how to do it right now. And without that, most of us are going to continue to have that seed of mistrust. Let's see, what else? The increased mental health and moral injury for advocates. Not only the Afghans, the advocates and the Afghan family members, but also for the family members of the advocates. This isn't family members and friends of the advocates, because you got to remember, they see what's going on with us. They see us in the same crisis that we see our Afghans in, and they don't know what's going on. I once told somebody that you would not know what's going on in my life unless I told you. And so that is kind of the same situation when you look at it from a friend's perspective, watching as you have a really bad day because your Afghan got caught by the Taliban and now his jaw is knocked out. So it's kind of that same aspect where they see it too. But having that ability for, say, like Senate or Congress or somebody in some sort of authoritative position stand up and say, hey, we recognize, like, you guys are definitely hurting for this. And so what we're going to do is we're going to try to help you guys figure it out. And hopefully get some buy-in and let us help the other people that'll come up behind us that, you know, moral injury isn't going away anytime soon. Other people are going to have it in the future, and what a great study group to have. You've got everybody in the advocate group, from Afghans that grew up in the culture to advocates that are military to advocates that are journalists to advocates that are child book authors and illustrators. It's such a diverse group, and it's such a disservice that we're not using it and giving us an opportunity to, number one, invest in the future. Number two, it would recognize and kind of validate what we're feeling. And number three, maybe it would do some good. And the last thing is contact your senators and your representatives about the Afghan Adjustment Act and some of the other measures that are trying to push forward to get increased SIVs, as well as some of the other stuff going on, some other considerations for some at-risk group. Not to plug another organization, but a good organization to figure out where the latest and greatest on those legislations are. It's going to be Afghan Evac.
Well, this is so much. My brain is spinning with all the things we talked about today, but it's awesome. And I really appreciate you coming on and bearing all those really difficult things that you dealt with. I imagine it's going to be really helpful for people who have dealt with many of the same things to maybe spur them to go get the help that they need, or to take a knee for themselves and, you know, take care of themselves too. I think all of this has been really enlightening and important, and I just thank you so much for coming on to share your story.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for having me, and best of luck in your podcast. Definitely thank you for continuing to kind of beat the drum and making sure that it's not overlooked.
I feel like the drum has a hole in it already, because I just don't stop beating it. So yeah, y'all know me.
Yeah, we'll patch it. It'll be good.
You just keep putting new skin on the drum, and then you just keep beating it until, yeah. Well, I want to put out the call out. I always do at the end of episodes to Afghan listeners to submit their stories so that we can share your stories along with these episodes as well. It's really important to hear Afghan voices, and the email address for that correspondence is the Afghanistan Project Podcast at gmail.com. Jen, thanks again for sharing your story, and thank you to all our listeners for sharing your time, for supporting the people of Afghanistan, for supporting the volunteers and veterans and service members who have put so much into the last 3 years, just poured themselves into this effort despite bureaucratic malfeasance and other BS. If you've enjoyed the episode, make sure you're following the YouTube channel and enabled all the notifications to hear about other episodes. And for now, Tasha Kaur, and hope to see you again soon.